It was a little past midnight when I first noticed something unusual. At that hour, the building is normally silent. You can hear the faint hum of the street outside, maybe the distant bark of a dog, but never more than that. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I caught the sound of footsteps from the apartment next door. They were slow, steady, and strangely repetitive, as if someone was pacing in a confined space. At first, I ignored it. Neighbors move around all the time, but these steps did not fade away. They continued in the same rhythm, back and forth again and again. After a while, they stopped directly at the wall that separated my apartment from his. I held my breath, listening, waiting for them to move again. But instead, the silence was broken by something far more unsettling. A faint whisper drifted through the wall. I could not make out the words, only the tone. Low, hushed, and uncomfortably close, as if someone was standing inches away on the other side. My skin prickled. I told myself it was probably a television left on. But deep inside I knew it was not. The voice had weight to it, too human, too deliberate. And then came the knock. A single slow thud against the wall right next to where my head rested on the pillow. The clock on my nightstand showed exactly 3 a.m. My heart sank. I sat up in bed, frozen, waiting to hear it again. A minute passed, then another silence. But I could not shake the feeling that whoever lived next door had done it on purpose, almost as if they knew I was awake and listening. It was late in the evening when I stepped out to throw some trash in the hallway bin. The building was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and unnatural. As I turned back toward my door, I froze. He was standing there. My neighbor, right outside my apartment, only a few feet away. He was not moving, not speaking, just standing completely still. His lips were stretched into a faint smile that did not look friendly. It looked wrong, too wide, too fixed, as if it had been carved into his face. I waited for him to say something, but he did not. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking, and the longer he stared, the more it felt like he was studying me. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. My throat was dry, and for a moment I considered asking if he needed something. But before I could, he leaned slightly forward and whispered. The sound was soft, almost too soft to hear, like breath slipping through his teeth. The words were impossible to understand, but the way he whispered made my skin crawl. It felt like the kind of sound you are not meant to hear, something private and unsettling. Then, without another word, he turned. He moved quickly back into his apartment and shut the door without a sound. I stood there in the hallway, heart pounding, unsure of what I had just witnessed. That night I lay awake wondering if he was simply an odd man, or if I had just seen something much more dangerous than I could understand. The first time I noticed something unusual outside my door, I tried not to think too much of it. It was a photograph, old and yellowed, lying face down on the mat. When I picked it up, I realized it had been torn clean in half. The face of a man had been ripped away, leaving only the other half with someone else standing beside him. I had never seen the picture before. I dropped it back down unsettled and went inside. A few days later, I found something else. This time it was a small key, old and rusted, placed carefully in the same spot as the photograph. It was too worn out to belong to anything in the building. I did not want to touch it, but leaving it there felt worse, like an invitation. I picked it up with shaking hands and threw it in the trash. That night when I came back from work, it was on the mat again. The last discovery was the one that broke me. Wrapped in a piece of dirty cloth, I found what looked like a small bone. At first, I thought it was from an animal, but the way it was wrapped almost carefully made me feel sick. I dropped it immediately, my stomach twisting, and when I looked up, I saw him. My neighbor was standing at the end of the hallway, half hidden in shadow. He did not say anything. He just watched me with that same unnatural stillness, his face expressionless, his eyes locked on mine. For a moment, I could not breathe. It felt less like coincidence and more like a warning. From then on, every time I opened my door, I hesitated, my heart pounding, wondering what I would find waiting for me next. Small key, old rusted invitation. Small bone, dirty cloth, sick. Neighbor, shadow warning. Hesitated, heart pounding. After the strange objects at my door, I began noticing him more often. At first it was only in the hallway, always too close, always too silent, but soon his presence spread beyond the walls of the building. One night as I parked my car and stepped out, I felt something pulling at my attention. When I looked up, I saw him in the far corner of the lot. He was not moving. He was not even pretending to be busy. He was simply standing there under the dim light, his face tilted upward. Staring straight at the window of my apartment, I froze beside my car, my keys still in my hand, until he finally turned and disappeared into the shadows. It did not stop there. More than once, walking home late at night, I felt the distinct sound of footsteps behind me. They would stop when I stopped, start when I started. My chest tightened with every step, but whenever I turned around, the street was empty. Yet the air carried that heavy silence that tells you someone is near, just out of sight. Every evening became a torment. Pulling back the curtain, I would find him again, standing outside, his head, tilted eyes fixed on my window as if he could see right through the glass. I tried to tell myself it was just coincidence, but the longer it went on, the more unbearable it became. I was not just being watched, I was being hunted. I woke up to a sound that did not belong in the quiet of my apartment. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized it was real. The front door handle was shaking violently, metal scraping against metal as if someone was trying to force their way inside. My heart raced so hard I could feel it in my throat. I slid out of bed slowly, my bare feet cold against the floor. Every rattle of the handle echoed through the silence of the apartment. It was frantic, desperate, like whoever was outside had no intention of stopping. With shaking hands, I crept toward the door, pressing myself against the wall beside it. The sound stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I forced myself to lean forward and look through the peephole. He was there. My neighbor. His face was so close to the door that his skin was pressed against it, distorting his features. His eyes were wide and unblinking, staring directly into the peephole as if he knew I was on the other side. Then I heard it. A whisper, low and broken, slipping through the crack of the door. My name. He was saying my name over and over, dragging it out like some twisted chant. My body locked in place. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I could not move. I stood there frozen, every muscle tense, while his whispering crawled under my skin. It felt endless, like time had stopped, like he would never leave. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to dial the number. When the police finally answered, my voice came out broken and weak. I begged them to come quickly, convinced that if I waited even a second longer, he would find a way inside. The officers arrived minutes later. I felt relief just hearing their footsteps in the hallway. They listened carefully as I explained what had happened, then turned toward the neighbor's apartment. The silence from behind his door was complete. No movement, no sound, only stillness. One of the officers pounded on the door and announced themselves. There was no response. After a short pause, they forced it open. The door groaned as it swung inward, and what lay beyond froze me where I stood. The apartment was empty. Not just empty, but abandoned. Dust covered the floor in thick layers. Cobwebs stretched across the corners, and the air smelled of rot and disuse. The walls were cracked. Police, broken voice, come quickly. Relief, footsteps, hallway. Neighbor's apartment, silence, no movement. Forced it open, no response. Abandoned apartment, dust, cobwebs, smell. Walls were cracked. The kitchen bare and the rooms hollow. There was no furniture, no personal belongings, no sign that anyone had lived there for years. I could not breathe. My mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. Every memory, every encounter, every whisper at night, every time I saw him watching me, all of it collapsed into one horrifying truth. The neighbor was never real. The officers looked at me with uneasy eyes, asking if I was sure about what I had experienced. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. And I knew that something had been in that hallway with me. Something that wanted me to believe it lived right next door. That night, I locked every door and window in my apartment. But I did not sleep. I knew now that sometimes the things we fear most are not strangers breaking in, but the ones who are already there, watching from the shadows, waiting for us to notice them. Not every neighbor is human. Sometimes what we think is strange or unusual is far darker than we can ever imagine. When you feel watched, do not ignore it. No sign that anyone had lived there for years. Every memory, every encounter, collapsed into one horrifying truth: neighbor was never real. Officers looked at me with uneasy eyes, asking if I was sure, something that wanted me to believe it lived right next door. Not every neighbor is human. Dark secrets. Feel watched. Do not ignore it.